Imagine this. On an ordinary Monday, when the courtroom hums with minor tickets and tired sighs, a man steps through the doorway with a smile that says, the law is something he buys, not something he follows. He doesn't hurry. He pauses inside, as if checking that the room remembers him. Benches creak as people shift. They recognize him. Assistant Mayor of Providence, the face from local news. On the docket, his case is small, a citation for parking in a restricted zone near City Hall. Yet he walks in like he's returning to his own conference room, chin slightly lifted, shoulders loose, every step suggesting this place works around him, not over him. The security officer by the door straightens too fast. "Morning, sir," he says, softer than before. The politician nods without slowing, accepting the greeting as something owed. In the front row, two older women fall silent. "Is that him?" one murmurs. "The one who promised to fix the vet's building," the other replies, then looks down at her hands. His suit is dark and simple, but cut too precisely to be ordinary. A slim watch flashes when he adjusts his cuff. Small city seal cufflinks catch the light. Nothing loud, yet every piece announces rank. At the defendant's table, he lets his gaze slide past the bench to the camera on the back wall. For a moment, he looks straight into the lens. His smile widens into the polished version saved for broadcasts. It lasts a second, enough to show he hasn't come feeling cornered. He's arrived for an appearance. When the clerk calls his name, he steps to the microphone, still watching the red recording light. Only after a beat does he turn toward the bench, as if reminding himself this is a courtroom, not a studio. The judge turns a few pages, paper rustles, then quiet. The politician leans toward the clerk, voice low. "Let's move this along. I got real business today." The clerk's pen stops. "Sir, we have to follow procedure," he answers. The politician's smile tightens. "I'm sure you will," he says. It sounds less like faith, more like direction. Now the judge lifts his head. "According to this," he says, "the vehicle was parked in a restricted zone for over an hour." The politician shrugs, as if the matter bores him. "Your Honor, I wasn't even driving that car. My aide was. I didn't know about the ticket." A few people trade looks on the benches. The excuse lands with the dull weight of something practiced. The judge closes the file, folds his hands, and studies the man in front of him, as though measuring more than a parking fine. "Interesting," he says. "You say you weren't behind the wheel. But..." The last word hangs in the air. The camera keeps rolling. For a moment, the room seems to lean forward, waiting to hear what that "but" will bring. His posture stiffens at that unfinished "but." Yet he forces a small laugh, the kind politicians use when the room isn't quite on their side. The judge doesn't return it. He simply waits, and waiting, from him, feels like pressure. The politician clears his throat and straightens his tie. He's 52, though the lines at his eyes make him look older in this lighting. Before stepping into city politics, he made his name as a criminal defense attorney, the kind who could dismantle witnesses with a single raised brow. People once said, he never lost. People still say it, though, now with a note of caution. His ascent in Providence came fast. Alliances with real estate developers, public promises about improving veteran housing, a reputation for being tough when needed. But the stories told in hallways paint a different picture. A man who expects obedience, not cooperation. The sort of official you try not to cross. He folds his hands behind his back, giving the illusion of calm. "Your Honor," he says, "that vehicle is used by several members of my staff. I rely on them to handle transportation. I can't be aware of every minor citation issued around the city." His tone carries a subtle implication. This case is beneath his level. But while he's speaking, something flickers, a nearly invisible tightening of the jaw when the judge says his full name, a brief clench of his fingers before he tucks them out of sight. Small, unguarded movements betray him more than his words. The judge glances down at the file again. "So, you're saying you weren't driving?" he repeats mildly. "Correct," the politician answers too quickly. He hears it himself, slows the next syllable, tries to soften it. "Correct, Honor." The judge's eyebrows lift slightly at the addition of "sureste," as though he's clocking it as an unusual choice from a man accustomed to commanding rooms. In the second row, an elderly woman with a cloth grocery bag leans toward her friend. She hadn't meant to speak loudly, but the courtroom is too still. Her whispered frustration carries. "I know him," she mutters. "Said he'd help us after the boiler broke, never even came back." The politician's head makes a small turn, not enough to admit he heard her, but enough to show the words landed. His shoulders shift, his stance recalibrates, and for an instant his practiced neutrality falters. The judge continues gently, almost conversationally. "And this car, the one that received the ticket, it's registered not to you as a private citizen, but to a charitable fund operating in your district. That's correct?" The politician blinks once, then nods. "Yes. The foundation manages several assets, vehicles included." A thin pause follows, the kind that feels intentional. "Do you commonly allow others to operate a car listed under a nonprofit entity?" the judge asks. His voice remains calm, but the question cuts differently than the earlier ones. It touches a deeper layer. Someone shifts in the back row. The clerk looks up from his notes. Even the officer by the door turns his head. The politician inhales slowly, controlling the pace of his breath. "It's not unusual," he replies. "Staff need mobility to accomplish tasks. There's nothing improper about that." Yet the response arrives a fraction of a second too late, like he needed to assemble it before speaking. Silence follows, stretched thin, expectant. The judge doesn't push further. He simply sets the file down and looks at the man before him as though examining the gaps between his sentences. In that quiet, the politician's composure tightens again. Not with confidence this time, but with the tension of someone unsure which detail the judge will question next. And then, in a measured voice that seems almost harmless, the judge asks, "So help me understand, sir. If the car wasn't under your control that morning, why were you listed as attending a municipal briefing that, according to the record, never took place?" He doesn't raise his tone. He doesn't need to. The air in the courtroom shifts, and the politician's eyes dart once, almost imperceptibly. He swallows, steadies himself, and forces a smile that doesn't belong on his face. "I'm certain there's a simple explanation," he says, but no one in the room believes he has it. The judge's question hangs in the air longer than it should, and the politician instinctively shifts his weight as if searching for a steadier patch of floor. His polished confidence, once effortless, now needs maintenance. The judge leans back slightly, a small movement, yet it changes the gravity of the room. "Let's focus on the morning of the violation," he says. "The car tied to your district's foundation was recorded entering the municipal zone at 8:13 a.m. You maintain you weren't the one driving. Fine. But the vehicle had been used earlier that same morning, well before office hours. Do you know anything about that?" "Not specifically," the politician answers. "Staff handle errands, supply runs." "That early?" the judge interrupts gently. A flicker of annoyance breaks through the man's expression. "Your Honor, I oversee multiple departments. I don't supervise dawn logistics." The judge doesn't react. He simply slides a single printed still from a traffic camera across the bench. "I'd like you to look at this." The politician hesitates before leaning forward. The photo is grainy but clear enough. Him, stepping into the driver's seat of the very car he said he hadn't touched that morning. In the background, a man in a dark jacket stands by the curb. The politician appears to be handing something to him, fingers curled around a small rectangular object. A murmur rolls through the benches. The politician exhales through his nose, slow and controlled. That's taken out of context, he says. I was briefly moving the vehicle. And the man, the judge repeats softly, is employed at a housing complex in your district. You're familiar with that facility, I assume. The politician's eyes narrow. I visit many sites. Before the judge can continue, the elderly woman from earlier raises her hand. She looks nervous but determined. Your Honor, she says, I don't mean to interrupt, but that fellow in the jacket? He worked maintenance in our building. He told us repairs were put on hold because someone upstairs hadn't approved the funds. The politician's shoulders draw tight. That has nothing to do with... The judge motions for calm, listening to the woman as though her words carry the weight of an affidavit. She adds more quietly, I recognize the car, too. It was parked outside our service entrance last month, early morning. Didn't make sense at the time. The courtroom stills. Even the recording camera seems more alert. The judge turns back to the defendant. Is there a reason you would be meeting with that employee near a restricted zone using a car registered to a charity on a morning when you claim to have been at a non-existent briefing? The precision of the question hits harder than volume ever could. The politician straightens, trying to reclaim authority. You're creating connections that aren't there. That foundation supports community projects. The car is part of that work. Any suggestion otherwise is... He trails off, unable to finish the sentence with conviction. The judge calmly lifts another sheet. Not a photo this time, but a time-stamped log of vehicle entries and exits associated with the Foundation's fleet. His finger taps one line. This record shows that same car made multiple stops over the past several weeks, all before sunrise, always near the same cluster of properties. A man in the back row raises his head at that. Others exchange glances, silent but alert. The politician senses the shift, and a new defensiveness edges into his voice. Those stops were routine, deliveries, surveys. I don't oversee every route. But you did oversee this particular morning, the judge says quietly, because you were behind the wheel. The camera places you there. The man's jaw tightens again. His earlier smirk has vanished entirely. I moved the car for 2 minutes, he insists. 2 minutes, that's all. The judge studies him for a long stretch, expression unreadable. Then perhaps you can explain, he says, sliding forward a second still image, why the man in the jacket appears to be receiving a packet from you during those 2 minutes. This photo is sharper. A small envelope, plain, unmarked, passes between their hands. A ripple of unease fills the room. The politician opens his mouth, then closes it again. Words don't come as easily now. The judge steeples his fingers. I'm not accusing you of anything beyond the scope of today's hearing, he says. But when a simple parking violation reveals patterns that raise broader questions, I must seek clarity. The defendant's throat moves in a hard swallow. For the first time, he looks less like a man controlling the room and more like someone calculating exits. Before he can speak, the elderly woman lifts her voice again, gentler this time, almost sorrowful. He told us, she says, that things would get better if the right people were paid attention to. A hush drops over the courtroom. The judge's eyes shift back to the politician. Care to comment? He asks softly. The man stares at the photo in front of him, unable to answer. And the silence that follows is louder than any accusation. The judge allows the silence to settle before placing a second document on the bench with deliberate care. This, he says, is a quarterly activity report from the foundation that owns the vehicle in question. No theatrics, no emphasis, just a sheet of paper, but the effect is immediate. Heads inclined forward on the benches, even the officer by the door tilts subtly closer. The judge continues, his tone steady. In the last 3 months, the foundation's spending increased significantly. Small disbursements, $200 here, $400 there, issued with predictable timing. Several recipients' names are withheld due to internal classification. He pauses, not to dramatize, but to let the numbers speak for themselves. I'm simply trying to understand how these entries relate to the vehicle's repeated early morning usage. The politician's reaction is too sharp. Those are internal records, he snaps. You weren't supposed to. The judge cuts in, not harshly, but with a firmness that resets the temperature of the room. In this courtroom, he says, there is no category of information labeled not for the judge. A small tremor moves across the politician's face. Not fear, but recognition that the ground beneath him has changed shape. He pulls back from the microphone as though distance might grant him composure. Another hand rises, the same elderly woman from before. She stands slowly, steadying herself on the bench. Your Honor, there's something else. The judge gestures for her to proceed. I saw that car again, she says. Before sunrise. It came to the service entrance behind our complex. That man in the jacket carried in boxes from the trunk. What kind of boxes? The judge asks. White, marked as medical supplies. But they were light, too light for anything real. The room tightens around her words. It's a detail no one expected, specific, practical, and unsettling. The judge turns back to the politician. Any explanation? The politician shakes his head once, not to deny, more like someone rejecting an unwelcome thought before it forms. My foundation partners with health programs, he says. Equipment distribution isn't unusual. But at 6 a.m, the judge asks calmly. The politician's gaze slides away. I can't account for every operational hour. Before the judge can respond, a quiet voice from the rear speaks up. A middle-aged man stands, wringing a cap in his hands. That maintenance worker, he says. The one in the photo. He was my brother. The courtroom freezes. He died 2 weeks ago, the man continues. Heart failure, they said. But the day before he passed, he told me he didn't want to be part of the arrangement anymore. I didn't know what he meant until just now. The politician's face drains of color. That's not. The judge lifts a hand gently, preventing the outburst. This hearing cannot determine the cause of anyone's death, he says, but testimony about the vehicle's use is relevant. He returns to the file, flips it open to the page listing the politician's claim schedule. You stated you were at a briefing the morning of the violation. Yes, the politician replies, brittle but controlled. I checked, the judge says softly. The briefing was moved to the following day. A faint rustle moves across the room, the sound of realization spreading. So I will ask again, the judge continues. Where were you before dawn, and why were you interacting with a foundation employee near those properties? The politician opens his mouth, but no answer emerges. His breath catches, his mind visibly stalling. Then, in a low voice that trembles at the edges, he says the one thing no seasoned official should ever say in a public proceeding. I think I should exercise my right not to testify further. A vacuum of silence follows, deeper than disbelief, heavier than accusation. Even the camera seems to hold still. The judge studies him with an unreadable calm, and the entire courtroom senses it. They have just crossed a threshold. Whatever this case was 5 minutes ago, it is now something entirely different. The judge rests his hands on the bench, fingers interlaced, and when he speaks again, his voice carries neither anger nor triumph, only a quiet gravity that draws every ear toward him. Sir, he says, people elected you to serve them, not to frighten them, not to confuse them, not to make them feel small. Public office is temporary. Trust is not. Something shifts in the room. A woman in the second row presses a tissue to her cheek. The clerk lowers his eyes, moved despite himself. The politician straightens, trying to reclaim the posture he walked in with. "You're lecturing me over a parking citation," he says sharply. "You have no idea what political reality actually looks like. This is nothing. Noise." "Noise," the judge repeats, not derisively, but as if testing the sharpness of the word. "Small acts of disregard, sir, are not noise. They're the stones that crack a foundation, not the dramatic scandals, the everyday dismissals. That's what erodes a community." The courtroom feels suddenly smaller, drawn inward around that truth. Before the politician can respond, a man from the back rises again, the brother of the maintenance worker. His composure wavers. He clutches the cap in both hands. "Your Honor, my brother wasn't perfect, but he was honest. He was scared the last time I saw him. He said he didn't want to deliver anything for them anymore. I didn't understand. Now I wish I had asked more." His voice cracks on the last word. A ripple of empathy sweeps the room. The politician looks away, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. The mask he's built over years of campaigns flickers at its edges. "That man's death has nothing to do with me," he says. But the sentence comes out too tight, too defensive to convince anyone. The judge doesn't accuse him. He simply folds the activity report, sets it aside, and picks up the citation file again as if returning the proceedings to their original scale. "This is still an administrative matter," he says. "I cannot rule on allegations I have no authority over." A sigh of disappointment sweeps the benches. People want more, want closure, want accountability. But the judge lifts a hand gently, as if calming an unseen wave. "However," he continues, "when evidence or testimony raises issues beyond this court's reach, I am obligated to forward the material to the proper investigators." The politician stiffens, understanding the implication instantly. "Forward it," he repeats. "Yes," the judge says, "to the Attorney General's office. They will decide what, if anything, warrants further review." A pale film settles over the politician's features. His mouth opens, closes, then remains parted in silent protest. The judge reaches for the citation paperwork. As for the violation itself, he says, "You provided conflicting statements regarding who was driving the vehicle, why it was there, and under what authority. Those inconsistencies matter." He signs the form with a clean, unhurried stroke. "I am imposing the maximum penalty for the infraction, along with an additional assessment for submitting information that cannot be verified as truthful. The amount isn't ruinous, but it's not meant to be." The judge speaks more softly now, addressing not just the man before him, but everyone watching. Consequences aren't always about the number written on a fine. Sometimes they're a mirror. You walked in this morning, certain of how this would go. The politician's jaw locks. "And I hope," the judge continues, "that when you return for any future proceedings, you enter with humility. Not the smile you gave that camera. Not the confidence of someone assuming special treatment. Just respect for the truth and for the people whose lives intersect with yours." The words land with the force of something larger than law, something moral, generational. For the first time since entering the courtroom, the politician can't find a response. The smirk is gone. The air around him feels heavier, and the entire room senses it. The real verdict hasn't fallen yet, but the fall has unmistakably begun. The politician steps back from the bench as if the floor has shifted beneath him. The swagger he carried in now hangs off him like an ill-fitting coat. He reaches for his briefcase, misses the handle the first time, then grips it tightly, knuckles whitening. As he turns toward the aisle, the room stays unnervingly silent. No murmurs, no shuffling, just the low hum of the recording camera. He walks slower than he entered, scanning the faces he once dismissed. Some look at him with anger, others with something worse. Disappointment. Near the door he hesitates. His hand hovers over the push bar. Then he stops and pivots back toward the bench. His voice, when it comes, is lower than before, stripped of its earlier bravado. "Judge, you think today meant something final? You think this ends here?" He doesn't raise his tone. He doesn't need to. The quietness itself feels menacing. "This is bigger than a courtroom," he says. "There are interests. You don't understand the scale." A few people gasp softly. The judge remains still, hands folded. The politician adds, "Today was just the opening move. The real game hasn't even started." He turns again to leave, but before he can press the door open, the judge speaks, not loudly, but with a clarity that fills the entire room. "Sir," he says, "grand games begin where conscience ends." The line falls with the weight of something that will echo far beyond the courtroom. The politician pauses, shoulder tightening, but he does not respond. He pushes the door open and steps into the hallway. The door swings shut behind him with a muted thud. Final, almost ceremonial. For a moment, the courtroom remains suspended in silence. Then the clerk approaches the bench, leaning in slightly so the microphones barely catch his words. "Judge, the Attorney General's office called," he says quietly. "They've already received the files. They're reviewing them today." The judge nods once, not in satisfaction, but in acknowledgement, like a man accepting a long-standing responsibility rather than celebrating a victory. "Thank you," he replies. He gathers the documents with measured care, not hurried, not triumphant, just steady. The kind of steadiness that keeps institutions standing when everything else trembles. As he prepares to leave the bench, the courtroom door creaks open, a latecomer who freezes when he sees the session ending. The judge gives him a small, reassuring nod. Even after a morning like this, he can offer that much. The benches empty slowly. People whisper, but their whispers are soft, thoughtful, not the gossiping tones of a spectacle, but the murmurs of citizens who have just witnessed something they weren't expecting, a moment where power met principle and didn't win. When the last observer steps out, the judge remains alone for a few breaths, studying the quiet room. The seal on the wall, the empty witness stand, the chair where the politician sat, pretending nothing could touch him. Then the audio fades with a final line, steady, reflective, spoken as if to the listener alone. Justice doesn't begin when someone is punished. It begins the moment they stop laughing at the truth. A soft click follows, the sound of lights dimming, of a courtroom closing, and the story ends in a silence that lingers long after the last word.